What if the Ice Age did not end quietly? What if, as the glaciers melted, whole hunting worlds disappeared, ancient coastlines drowned, giant animals vanished, and humanity was forced to enter a world it had never known before? Tonight, we are not only following the melting ice. We are following the moment when the old frozen world faded away, and the first shape of our world began. What if the end of the Ice Age was not the end of a cold climate, but the end of an entire human world? Imagine standing on a hill of frozen earth, long before cities, long before writing, long before kings carved their names into stone. Before you, the land stretches into a pale distance. The wind moves over open plains. Far away, a line of mammoths walks beneath a low winter sun, their dark shapes moving slowly across a world of ice, grass, hunger, and fire. Behind you, smoke rises from a small camp near the mouth of a cave. Inside, people sit close together in the glow of flame, wrapped in skins, listening to the wind press against the stone like something alive. They do not know they are living at the end of an age. To them, this frozen world is not ancient history. It is home. And that is the mystery we are entering tonight. What really happened after the Ice Age? Not only to the glaciers, not only to the animals, but to the people who had learned to live beneath cold skies, and then watched the world they understood slowly disappear. The Ice Age was not a single moment of endless snow. It was a long and changing span of time, with colder periods and warmer pauses, advancing ice and retreating ice, dry grasslands, frozen rivers, windswept valleys, and great regions where humans, animals, and weather lived in a delicate and demanding balance. For thousands of years, people adapted to that balance. They followed herds. They learned the seasons. They read tracks in snow, mud, and dust. They knew where to find stone for tools, where animals crossed valleys, where shelter waited in rock, and where fire could mean the difference between another night and no morning at all. To us, the Ice Age can sound like a frozen wilderness. But to the people who lived in it, it was a known world. Harsh, yes. Dangerous, yes. But known. The horizon had patterns. The animals had routes. The stars returned to the same cold sky. The wind carried signs that experienced ears could hear. A shift in weather. A coming herd. The warning of hunger. The promise of movement. Imagine one of their nights. The land outside is dark and wide. The ground is hard beneath a thin skin of frost. Near a cliff or cave, a fire burns low, its light moving over faces, hands, stone tools, bones, and painted walls. Children sleep close to the warmth. Older people watch the flames. Hunters sit with quiet patience, repairing points, scraping hides, shaping wood, remembering the paths they must take at dawn. Beyond the firelight, the Ice Age animals move. Mammoths. Woolly rhinoceroses in some regions. Wild horses. Reindeer. Bison. Great cats. Wolves. Creatures that belong to a colder world, a world of long distances and open lands. These animals were not background to human life. They shaped it. A herd could feed people, clothe them, guide them across landscapes, and pull them onward through the year. Animal movement became human movement. Where the herds went, people watched. When the herds changed direction, human plans changed too. In a world like that, survival was not only strength. It was attention. People had to notice everything. A print in mud. A broken branch. A change in the smell of wind. The sound of birds lifting suddenly from a plane. The silence of animals before weather turned. They lived in conversation with the land, not through written words, but through signs older than writing. And above all of it stood the ice. Glaciers were not just frozen water. They were mountains that moved slowly. White, blue, heavy, and almost beyond imagination, they covered enormous regions of the northern world. Ice sheets rose over landscapes, reshaping stone, grinding valleys, holding vast amounts of water locked away from the sea. To the humans living near their edges, the ice may have felt like the boundary of existence. A pale wall at the end of the known world. A place of danger. A place of spirits, perhaps. A place where weather was born. We have to be careful here. We cannot know exactly what Ice Age people believed about glaciers, mammoths, stars, or fire. Their thoughts did not survive in books, because books had not yet come. But we do have traces of their lives: tools, bones, hearths, shelters, ornaments, burials, carved figures, cave art, and the marks of human hands left on stone. These are evidence. And they tell us something quietly powerful. The people of the Ice Age were not primitive shadows waiting for history to begin. They were intelligent, observant, creative human beings. They made tools with skill. They crossed difficult landscapes. They cared for one another. They created images. They remembered places. They told stories, even if the words are lost to us now. In caves across parts of Europe and beyond, animals appear on stone walls with a strange, living grace. Horses, bison, deer, mammoths, lions. The bodies curve and move in the flicker of torchlight. Some images seem almost to breathe when flame passes over them. We should not pretend to know exactly what every image meant. They may have been ritual, memory, teaching, hunting magic, story. A way of meeting the animal world in darkness. Or something we no longer have the language to understand. But standing before those ancient images, even in imagination, we feel one thing clearly. The Ice Age world was not empty. It was filled with meaning. A mammoth was not only meat. A cave was not only shelter. Fire was not only heat. The sky was not only weather. Every part of the world could become part of a story, because survival itself depended on remembering how the world behaved. This is why the end of the Ice Age matters so deeply. Because when the climate began to shift, people were not simply watching ice melt. They were watching meaning move. The old hunting grounds changed. The old animal routes changed. Rivers changed. Coastlines changed. The very map of memory began to loosen. But before that transformation, there was the long frozen world. A world of open steppe and tundra. A world where grasses grew beneath cold skies and fed immense animals. A world where humans moved lightly across land, carrying what mattered: tools, skins, fire, memory, children, stories. No walls held them. No city gates opened or closed. No temple bells called them at dawn. Their world was motion. Seasonal paths. Temporary camps. Return routes. Known shelters. Places where stone could be found. Places where animals crossed. Places where ancestors had lived, died, and perhaps were remembered in ways we can only imagine. Picture a group moving at dusk. The sun is low and pale. Their breath turns white in the air. A child walks beside an elder, holding a small bundle. A hunter carries spears tipped with stone. Someone else carries embers carefully protected, because fire is not easily abandoned. Behind them, the tracks of their steps mark the frozen ground, and ahead of them, the dark shapes of animals move across the plain. They are following life. Not wandering aimlessly. Following knowledge. Knowledge held in bodies, songs, gestures, warnings, and remembered places. This is accepted interpretation based on the way many hunter-gatherer societies lived and the archaeological evidence we have for Ice Age mobility. But every human group was different. Some stayed longer in certain places. Some returned season after season. Some may have formed larger gatherings at rich hunting grounds or during special times of the year. Even in the cold, human life was not one simple pattern. It was varied, adaptive, careful, and often more sophisticated than the word survival can capture. Because survival is not only staying alive. It is learning where beauty can be found in a hard world. A necklace of shells carried far from the sea. A carved figure small enough to fit in the hand. Red pigment placed with care. A child's footprint preserved beside an adult's. A hearth rebuilt in the same shelter. An image of an animal painted where no daylight reaches. These things tell us that people did not only endure the Ice Age. They inhabited it. They made it human. Still, the cold shaped everything. Hunger could arrive quietly. A herd might not come. A storm might cover tracks. A river might freeze in a dangerous way. A wound, a failed hunt, an early winter, or a lost fire could change the future of a family. And yet, within that uncertainty, there was a kind of order. The cold world had rules. Hard rules, but rules. People learned them. They taught them. They trusted them enough to move through landscapes that would seem impossible to us. The ice was part of those rules. The animals were part of those rules. The seasons were part of those rules. Even danger was familiar. And this is the quiet truth at the center of Part 1. For the people of the Late Ice Age, the frozen world may not have felt like a temporary chapter before the real world began. It was the real world. It was the only world their grandparents had known. And their grandparents before them. A child born near the edge of a glacier did not think, one day this will all melt and the seas will rise and the animals will vanish and people will settle in new ways and the first great civilizations will someday appear beside rivers under warmer skies. A child saw the world as children always do. As permanent. The ice was there. The cold wind was there. The animals were there. The paths were there. The stories were there. And as long as the elders remembered the way across the land, the world seemed knowable. But the earth was already keeping another time. A deeper time. Slow changes were beginning far beyond any single campfire. The climate was shifting. The great ice sheets, which had held so much of the world's water, would not remain forever at their greatest reach. In many regions, temperatures slowly warmed. Glaciers began to retreat, not like a curtain pulled back in a day, but like an enormous sleeping creature withdrawing across centuries. At first, no one would have seen the whole change. No human life was long enough to watch the full transformation. But people might have noticed smaller signs. A valley opening where ice had been. A river running stronger in spring. A marsh forming where dry land used to be. A herd arriving later, or not at all. A familiar route becoming difficult. A coastline shifting beyond the memory of the young, though not beyond the memory of the old. The world was beginning to move. Slowly. Quietly. Irresistibly. The frozen order was loosening. And because the Ice Age world had shaped human life so completely, the end of that world would ask human beings to change with it. Not all at once. Not everywhere in the same way. But deeply. The end of the Ice Age did not simply bring warmer air. It began to rearrange water, land, animals, movement, memory, and possibility. It began to create a different Earth. An Earth where some old hunting worlds would fade. Where seas would climb over lowlands. Where land bridges would disappear beneath waves. Where rivers would carve new paths through newly freed ground. Where forests would spread. Where animals that once defined the cold world would retreat, transform, or vanish. And where human beings would begin, slowly, to imagine new ways of living. But on the last nights of the frozen world, no one knew all of this. They only knew the fire. The breath of sleeping children. The sound of wind beyond the cave. The stars above the ice. the dark shapes of animals moving across the plain. And perhaps, somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of water running where ice had once been silent. At first, the melting of the Ice Age would not have looked like the end of a world. It may have looked like spring arriving a little differently. A river running louder than it used to. A valley opening a little farther toward the north. A hillside showing dark soil where snow had once stayed longer. A herd changing its path, not enough to frighten everyone, but enough for the oldest hunters to notice. The earth rarely changes in a way that one human life can fully understand. It moves through generations. It asks one family to adjust a path, another to move a camp, another to follow animals farther than before. Then, many years later, children hear their elders speak of a colder world, a world they themselves have never seen. This is one of the mysteries of the end of the Ice Age. The transformation was enormous. But much of it happened slowly. So slowly that people living through it may not have thought of themselves as living through a great ending. They may have simply thought the weather was different. The animals had moved. The rivers had become stronger. The coast had changed. And the old routes no longer worked as they once had. Across many parts of the world, as climate warmed after the last glacial maximum, glaciers began to retreat. Ice that had held vast amounts of water returned to rivers, lakes, and seas. Landscapes that had been pressed beneath ice or shaped by cold began to open. Forests expanded in some regions. Wetlands formed. Rivers swelled with meltwater and carved new paths across the land. This is established through geological and archaeological evidence. We can study ancient shorelines, lake sediments, pollen, shells, bones, tools, and submerged landscapes. But evidence tells us what happened to land. It cannot fully tell us what it felt like to watch the familiar world slowly move away. Imagine a camp beside a river at dawn. The air is still cold, but not as cold as the stories say it once was. Mist rises from the water. The river is fuller than before, carrying pieces of broken ice and branches from upstream. On the bank, footprints soften and blur almost as soon as they are made. A person stands with a spear in one hand and watches the current. They know this river. Their parents knew it. Their grandparents crossed it at a shallow place farther down. But that crossing is gone now. Not forever, perhaps. No one knows yet. Only gone. The water has deepened over the stones. The current has grown faster. The old safe place no longer behaves like memory says it should. That is how change enters a human world. Not always as terror. Often as confusion. The land no longer answers in the same way. A path that once led safely across a valley now ends in marsh. A hunting ground grows thick with young trees. A ridge once used to watch herds becomes less useful because the herds no longer pass below. A riverbank collapses after thaw. A frozen lake that could once be crossed in season becomes uncertain. The old knowledge is still precious, but now it must be questioned. And questioning old knowledge can be one of the most unsettling things a people ever does. Because knowledge is not only practical. It is identity. A group knows itself through the routes it walks, the animals it follows, the shelters it returns to, and the stories it tells around fire. When those routes change, something inside the people changes too. The melting world was not just warmer. It was less predictable. At the edge of retreating glaciers, water moved everywhere. Streams braided across open ground. Meltwater lakes formed against ice, shining pale blue beneath the sky. Some overflowed. Some drained suddenly through cracks and channels. Rivers grew wider, carrying silt the color of ground stone. Valleys that had once been sealed by ice became corridors for animals, plants, and people. But every new opening meant an older boundary had moved. Picture the glacier itself from far away. A great wall of white and blue, cracked and shadowed, standing beneath a pale sky. At its base, water runs in dark channels. Small pieces fall. Not with the violence of a legend, but with the slow certainty of a world-changing form. The ice is not dying in one moment. It is withdrawing. And behind it, the land appears. Raw. Wet. Stony. New to the sun. For humans, such new land could be opportunity. New paths. New animals. New plants. New stone. New places to camp. But new land is also uncertain land. It has no deep memory yet. No stories attached to every hollow. No ancestor remembered beneath every ridge. People entering it would need to learn again. Where does the water gather? Where do the animals cross? Which plants can be eaten? Where does fog settle? Where is the ground safe? Where can a child sleep without danger from cold, flood, or animal movement? A changing climate does not only remove old worlds. It creates strange new ones. Farther south and along coasts, another transformation was underway. As ice melted, seas rose. Slowly by human measure in many periods, more quickly in some pulses, but over thousands of years the difference was immense. Lands that had once been dry became shore, then marsh, then seabed. Wide plains near the coast were covered. River mouths shifted. Estuaries formed. Islands separated from mainland. Land bridges vanished beneath waves. To archaeology, these are drowned landscapes. To ancient memory, they may have been lost worlds. Imagine a coastline before the sea has fully claimed it. The beach lies far out beyond where our modern maps might place it. Low grasslands stretch toward the horizon. People have walked there for generations, hunting, gathering shellfish, moving between camps, watching birds, making fires near the edge of water. Then, over years, the sea moves closer. A little closer. Then closer again. The old camp near the dunes is abandoned. The shell beds are covered. A freshwater spring turns salty. A place where children once ran becomes a tidal flat. The people move inland, not because the world has ended in a single night, but because the edge of the world keeps arriving. This is one of the quietest and most haunting images of the post-Ice Age world. Coastlines disappearing without a witness who can see the whole story. One generation remembers a wide plain. The next remembers a marsh. The next knows only water. And then, after enough time, someone tells a child that people once walked where the waves now move. The child looks out over the sea. The water shines. Gulls turn above it. Nothing in the surface proves the story. But the elder remembers. Or remembers the memory of someone before them. This is how possible historical memory can become myth. Carefully, we can say this: many flood stories from around the world may reflect, in part, human experiences of local floods, river changes, coastal flooding, storm surges, sea level rise, or other water events. We cannot responsibly say they all come from the end of the Ice Age. We cannot say every myth is a fossil of one ancient disaster. But it is possible, and to many scholars interesting, that some traditions preserve echoes of real environmental changes, shaped by generations of storytelling into sacred memory. A flood myth does not need to be a literal map to carry truth. It may carry the feeling of land lost to water. The memory of leaving. The lesson that a familiar world can disappear. And after the Ice Age, there were many reasons for such memories to form. Lowlands drowned. Coasts shifted. Rivers changed course. Meltwater transformed valleys. Animal migrations moved. Old hunting worlds faded. One of the most important changes involved the great animals. The Ice Age had been a world of megafauna in many regions: mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths in the Americas, woolly rhinoceroses in Eurasia, huge deer, large predators, and many others depending on place and time. As the climate warmed and environments changed, many of these animals declined or disappeared. The causes are still studied and debated, and they were likely complex. Climate change played an important role. Human hunting may have contributed in some regions. Habitat changes, ecosystem shifts, and timing all mattered. It was not one simple cause everywhere. But for humans living through it, the result would have been felt in the body. The animals that shaped the old world were becoming harder to find. Picture a group of hunters standing on a ridge where herds once passed. Below them, the valley is greener than it used to be. Shrubs grow where open grasses once stretched. Young trees gather along the stream. The wind still moves over the land, but it carries different smells. They wait. They remember the old movement of animals. But the valley remains quiet. Perhaps the herd has gone north. Perhaps it has changed its route. Perhaps there are fewer animals now. Perhaps the elders do not say the final thought aloud. The world of the hunt is thinning. For people whose lives were woven into animal migrations, this was not only an economic change. It was emotional, spiritual, cultural. The animals had been food, clothing, tools, stories, images, teachings, danger, beauty, and rhythm. When they changed, the human imagination had to follow. Some groups adapted by hunting different animals. Some followed herds into new territories. Some turned more strongly toward fish, birds, shellfish, nuts, seeds, roots, or small game. Some spent longer in places where resources were rich. Some began to gather in more stable seasonal camps. Some eventually took steps that, much later, would help lead toward farming and settled life in certain regions. This was not a straight road. Humanity did not simply move from hunters to farmers because the ice melted. History does not move like a ladder. It branches. It loops. It adapts. Many hunter-gatherer societies continued for thousands of years with deep knowledge and complex lifeways. Farming emerged in different places for different reasons, and not always immediately after the ice. But the end of the Ice Age changed the stage on which human choices were made. A warmer world opened some possibilities and closed others. Forests spread into former open landscapes. Rivers became rich corridors. Coasts offered abundant resources, even as they also changed. Some regions became more stable. Others became uncertain. The old world of cold plains and giant herds gave way, slowly and unevenly, to a patchwork of new environments. The map of survival had to be rewritten. And in the middle of this transformation, human memory became a vessel. People remembered the colder time. They remembered larger animals. They remembered land beyond the water. They remembered crossings that no longer existed. They remembered ice where now there was river. They remembered a shoreline farther away. Or, if they did not remember personally, they inherited remembrance through stories. There was once land beyond that strait. There were animals greater than any we see now. There was a path across the plain where the sea now lies. There was a cold time when the world was open and white, and the people followed herds under stars that seemed closer to the earth. Whether such stories survived in recognizable form is difficult to prove. Memory changes. Myths transform. Languages vanish. But the possibility is haunting. Because after the Ice Age, the earth itself became an archive of absence. Places existed where people had lived, but the evidence now lay beneath sea. Paths had been walked that no foot could walk again. Camps had stood where waves moved. The map held empty spaces that were not always empty in memory. In parts of the world, land bridges that once connected regions were covered by rising seas. The separation of islands and mainlands changed animal movement and human movement. The transformation of the land between Britain and continental Europe, often called Doggerland by modern researchers, is one well-known example of a region that was once inhabited and later submerged. Other drowned landscapes exist around the world. To us, these names are research topics. To ancient people, they would have been home ground, hunting ground, gathering ground, sacred ground. Land does not become less meaningful because it later becomes seabed. It may become more meaningful in memory because it cannot be reached. Imagine standing on a new shoreline at evening. The sea is calm. The sun lowers into a wide band of gold. Behind you, people are setting up camp farther inland than their parents did. Before you, the water covers a low plain. There is no marker, no wall, no sign. Only water. But an elder points outward. Out there, the elder says, we used to walk. The younger ones listen, perhaps believing, perhaps only half believing, because to them the water seems eternal. This is how a changing world teaches uncertainty. Before, the land may have seemed like the thing that remained while humans came and went. After, even land had a memory of movement. The end of the Ice Age created a world in which people could no longer trust the old edges completely. The ice edge moved. The sea edge moved. The forest edge moved. The animal routes moved. Rivers moved. And so people moved too. Some followed the retreating cold. Some settled near new waters. Some explored newly opened land. Some lost old lands to the sea. Some returned to places and found them changed beyond use. Movement had always been part of human life, but now movement carried a different feeling. Not only following abundance. Also leaving disappearance. Picture a family group traveling to higher ground. They carry tools wrapped in hide. Bundles of dried food. Bone needles. Stone blades. Wooden shafts. Small carved objects. Perhaps pigments. Perhaps memories of caves, camps, and shorelines. Children walk in the middle. The older ones look back often. Below them, a river has spread wider than before, reflecting the pale sky in broken pieces. A path they used in childhood is now covered. A place where animals gathered is empty. Ahead, there is a ridge where they may camp. A new place. A place without ancestral stories yet. That is one of the quiet burdens of migration. New land may save the body before it comforts the heart. You can sleep on new ground. You can make a fire there. You can find water, stone, roots, animals, shelter. But belonging takes time. Belonging is made by repetition. By burying the dead. By naming rocks and bends in rivers. By telling a child where their mother once found berries. By returning after winter. By saying, this is the place where we came after the water. In the melting world, countless new belongings had to be made. And perhaps countless old belongings had to be released. The glaciers retreated. Forests rose. Rivers ran strong. Seas climbed. Animals moved. People adapted. But adaptation is not a cold mechanical thing. It is made of grief and invention together. A person learns a new route because the old one is gone. A group hunts smaller animals because the great herds no longer pass. A family gathers more from the shore because the inland plains have changed. A community stays longer near a rich river because moving endlessly has become less useful. A child grows up in a world their grandparents barely recognize. In accepted historical interpretation, the period after the last ice age saw major environmental changes that influenced human societies in many regions. In some places, more settled ways of life emerged before farming. In others, farming developed later under different local conditions. In still others, mobile hunter-gatherer lifeways continued successfully. There was no single human response. There were many. And that is important, because it keeps the mystery real. The end of the Ice Age did not push all people through the same doorway. It opened many doors. Some led to coasts. Some to forests. Some to river valleys. Some to highlands. Some, eventually, to villages. Some to the first experiments in cultivation. Some to new spiritual worlds shaped by new landscapes. It is tempting to imagine history as a neat path from ice to agriculture to cities. But the real story is more like water spreading through many channels. Some channels run fast. Some slow. Some vanish into marsh. Some join into great rivers. And all of them carry human beings trying to understand what kind of world they now inhabit. As the ice melted, the sky itself may have felt different. Not because the stars changed, but because the ground beneath them did. In the old cold world, the open plains allowed long views. Animals could be seen moving across distance. Weather approached from far away. In the new world, forests in some regions closed the horizon. Trees gathered where grassland had been. The sounds changed. Instead of wind crossing open steppe, there was leaf movement, birdsong, shadows, hidden animals, damp earth. For people used to the old openness, a forest could feel like another kind of world. Rich, alive, useful. But also enclosing. Unknown. A place where sight shortened and listening became deeper. Elsewhere, wetlands spread. Reeds rose taller than a person. Birds nested in abundance. Fish moved through channels. Mud held footprints briefly and then erased them. Wetlands could feed people generously, but they also demanded new knowledge. Boats, traps, nets, seasonal timing, careful movement through water and mud. So the end of ice did not simply soften life. It complicated it. New abundance appeared, but not always in old forms. The old skills remained, but new skills mattered. And with new skills came new stories. The people who lived through these changes may have begun to tell stories not only about animals, but about transformation itself. Why the sea covers old land. Why certain animals are gone. Why mountains hold cold even in warmer seasons. Why rivers must be respected. Why ancestors once crossed where no one can cross now. Why the world before was different. The myths we know from later civilizations were written down long after these changes. We should not collapse deep prehistory and later literature into one simple line. But it is possible that human beings carried very old memories forward in forms that changed beyond recognition. A story can survive long after its original landscape is gone. It can lose its first names and gain new gods. It can become a warning, a sacred tale, a genealogy, a ritual, a fragment inside a larger myth. This is how memory travels through time. Not untouched. Transformed. Like ice becoming water, water becoming river, river becoming sea. By the later ancient world, flood stories appear in powerful forms. Mesopotamian myths speak of divine decisions, boats, survivors, and the renewal of life. Other cultures tell of waters that remake the human world. Some of these stories may reflect local flood experiences, river civilizations, agricultural anxieties, storm memory, or symbolic ideas of destruction and rebirth. Some may also carry deeper echoes of living in a world where water had once changed the map. We do not know. But we can wonder, gently. Because wonder is not the same as certainty. A sleep mystery does not need to solve everything. It can let possibilities rest side by side. Evidence tells us the ice melted. Evidence tells us seas rose. Evidence tells us coastlines changed and some inhabited lands were submerged. Evidence tells us animals disappeared or shifted in range. Evidence tells us humans adapted in many ways. Myth tells us that people remembered great waters. Interpretation asks whether some memories of environmental change may have survived as story. Imagination asks what it felt like. And perhaps feeling is the part that matters most tonight. Imagine again the people on higher ground. The sky is cloudy but bright. Below them, water moves through a valley in new channels. Some places are beginning to dry. Others remain shining and unreachable. A child asks when they will go home. No one answers quickly. An elder kneels and touches the soil, pressing it between fingers. A hunter looks toward the far ridge, thinking of the route the animals used to take. A mother unwraps a bundle of tools and checks what has survived the journey. Someone places a small carved object on a flat stone, not as a great ceremony, but as a quiet request. Let this place hold us. The old world is still close. Close enough to see. Close enough to name. But no longer close enough to return to unchanged. That is the threshold. That is where part 2 rests. The ice has withdrawn. The waters have risen. The animals have moved. The coastlines have shifted. The old paths have become uncertain. And human beings, who had lived for so long inside the rhythm of the frozen world, now stand in the doorway of another age. They are not yet city builders. Not yet the people of walls, temples, writing, and kings. But they are no longer only the people of the old ice. When the frozen world melted, it did not leave humanity empty-handed. It left rivers, coasts, forests, new abundance, new dangers, new memories, new grief, new possibilities. And perhaps, most quietly of all, it left a question that would shape the long human future. If the world can change so completely, what must we build so that something of us remains? When the ice left, it did not leave a blank earth behind. It left a world full of signs. Rivers ran through valleys that had once been frozen or dry. Forests spread where open plains had reached toward the horizon. Coastlines took new shapes. Low lands disappeared under quiet seas. Animals followed new paths, or faded from the places where people had known them. And human beings stood inside this changed world with fire in their hands, memory in their minds, and the old question rising softly around them. How do we live here now? The first world after the Ice Age was not peaceful in a simple way. No ancient world was. There was still hunger. Still cold in winter. Still danger in the dark. Still uncertainty in every season. But it was different. The great frozen order had loosened. The old landscapes of mammoths, long grasslands, glaciers, and endless cold had given way to a warmer and more varied earth. Some places grew richer. Some became harder. Some became wetlands, forests, coasts, river valleys, lakes, and islands. To us, looking back, this may seem like the beginning of the world we know. But for those who lived through it, it may have felt like the aftermath of a world they had lost. Imagine a small group at dawn, standing beside a river in the centuries after the ice. Mist rises slowly from the water. The river is strong, filled by distant melt and mountain snow. On its banks grow reeds, willows, and young trees. Birds move in the pale morning light. Fish disturb the surface with tiny circles. The people watching it are not strangers to rivers. Human beings had always known water. But this river belongs to a new pattern. It carries different animals, different plants, different seasons, and new possibilities. It feeds the land around it. It offers fish, reeds, birds, clay, fresh water, and a route through the landscape. It also demands attention. Because the generations before have learned something the hard way. Water gives. Water takes. Water remembers every low place. So people begin to stay near it, but not too near. They build on slightly higher ground. They return season after season. They gather where food is abundant. They learn when fish run, when plants ripen, when birds arrive, when floods come, when the river is gentle and when it should be left alone. In many regions after the Ice Age, human lifeways became increasingly varied. Some communities remained highly mobile. Some moved seasonally between known places. Some settled for longer periods where resources were especially rich. Some began managing plants and animals in ways that, over long periods, would contribute to farming in certain parts of the world. This is established broadly in archaeology, though the details differ greatly from region to region. There was no single path. No one morning when humanity simply woke and became civilized. Instead, there were countless small decisions. Stay here a little longer. Store food for later. Return to this place next season. Plant near the camp. Protect the seeds. Mark the grave. Build the wall stronger. Raise the floor. Remember the flood. Follow the animals farther north. Watch the river. Teach the child. History often begins like this. Not with trumpets, but with repetition. A camp becomes a place people return to. A return place becomes a settlement. A settlement becomes a memory center. A memory center becomes sacred. And somewhere in that slow transformation, the world after the ice begins to form the roots of the world that would later build cities. But before walls, before temples, before kings, there is the simple human act of staying. Staying long enough for a hearth to gather ash. Staying long enough for children to know the shape of a hill. Staying long enough for the dead to remain nearby. Staying long enough for a story to attach itself to the land. Picture one of these early settled places. Not a city. Not yet. A cluster of shelters near a river bend or a lake edge, raised just above the wet ground. Smoke rises in the evening. Fish dry on wooden racks. Seeds are stored in baskets. Stone tools are placed carefully near the entrance of a shelter. A child sleeps beside a dog. An elder watches the river as if listening to a language only long years can teach. There is no palace. No written law. No army. But already, the place has begun to hold memory. This is where the first child was born after the journey. This is where the old hunter died. This is where the river rose higher than expected. This is where the people gathered after the animals changed their route. This is where the fire was kept through winter. Such places become important not because they are grand, but because human life repeats there. And repetition is the beginning of belonging. In the old Ice Age world, belonging may have been spread along routes. A chain of camps, caves, river crossings, hunting grounds, and seasonal shelters. After the ice, in some places, belonging began to gather more tightly around particular landscapes. A rich shoreline. A river valley. A high place above floodwater. A fertile plain. A spring. A hill that remained dry when the lowlands turned to marsh. As people gathered, memory gathered with them. Stories became anchored. Here is where the ancestor crossed. Here is where the waters came. Here is where the animals vanished from the old valley. Here is where we first planted. Here is where the sky gave warning. Here is where the dead must be honored. In such a world, myth and memory begin to grow around the same roots. Later ancient stories would speak of flood survivors, divine warnings, sacred mountains, and ancestors who lived before a great change. We should not read them too literally as direct reports from the end of the Ice Age. Most were shaped much later, in cultures with their own religious, political, and poetic meanings. But beneath them, we can hear a human pattern. People remember thresholds. They remember the moment before and after. Before the water. After the water. Before the ice left. After the animals changed. Before the old road vanished. After the people moved to higher ground. Myth takes these thresholds and turns them into sacred time. It says there was once a world before this one. Then something happened. Then humanity began again. Archaeology looks for tools, bones, sediments, seeds, hearths, buildings, and buried traces. Myth looks for meaning. Imagination listens to both, gently, without forcing them to become the same thing. And when we listen this way, the first world after the Ice Age becomes more than a chapter of climate history. It becomes a human awakening. Not because people before were asleep. They were not. Ice Age humans were already fully human: makers, artists, hunters, singers, parents, mourners, storytellers. But after the ice, the world invited different forms of human life. New forms of staying. New forms of storing. New forms of gathering. New forms of remembering. The warmer world offered possibilities that the frozen world had not offered in the same way. In some places, wild grains became abundant. In others, fish and shellfish supported larger communities. Rivers created fertile corridors. Seasonal predictability in certain regions allowed people to return again and again. Over long stretches of time, these patterns helped make farming, villages, and later civilizations possible. This does not mean climate alone created civilization. It did not. Civilization is never born from one cause. It grows from environment, invention, pressure, cooperation, conflict, ritual, trade, memory, and countless human choices that can never be fully recovered. But the end of the Ice Age changed the conditions. It opened the door to a different relationship between people and land. In the frozen world, people often followed the movement of animals across great spaces. In the post-Ice Age world, in some regions, people began to follow the rhythm of places more closely. A river that flooded and renewed soil. A field of wild grain that returned each year. A coastline rich with food. A hillside safe from rising water. A valley where people could gather, store, and plan. This is the quiet beginning of a different future. A future where humans do not only move through the world. They begin to shape it around memory. Imagine a group returning to the same place for the 10th season. The shelters are rebuilt where they stood before. The old hearth is uncovered. A buried cache of tools is opened. Seeds from last year are found dry enough to use. The dead are remembered nearby. The children know which path leads to the water. Someone repairs a wall. Someone marks a stone. Someone says, "We should stay longer this time." There is no great announcement. No one says, "History begins here." But something is changing. The land is becoming a partner in memory. And as memory deepens, so does responsibility. If people stay, they must decide how to share food. Where to store it. Who watches it. Who may take from it. When to move. When not to move. Where to bury the dead. Where to place offerings. Where children may go. What stories must be told before winter. These are small questions, but over time, small questions become customs. Customs become rules. Rules become law. And law, in the ancient world, often grows beneath the shadow of gods, ancestors, and sacred memory. Perhaps this is why later civilizations so often connect order with divine will. After a world of change, order feels holy. A wall is not only mud brick. It is protection from uncertainty. A granary is not only storage. It is hope made visible. A shrine is not only devotion. It is a place where memory can kneel. A law is not only control. It is the promise that the next generation will not be left helpless before chaos. Think of the first raised platforms. Simple at first. Earth packed higher than the surrounding ground. Stone placed carefully. Wooden posts. A space set apart from ordinary walking. Perhaps offerings are placed there. Shells. Bones. Grain. Flowers. A carved figure. A bowl of water. The platform rises above mud. Above flood. Above daily life. Not high enough to reach heaven. Only high enough to say, this place matters. Later, in some regions, sacred architecture would grow astonishingly complex. Temples, towers, pyramids, ziggurats, tombs, sanctuaries. But somewhere beneath the grandeur of later civilization, we can imagine simpler beginnings. A high place. A remembered place. A place where the living speak to the dead, the gods, the sky, or the mystery of survival. In the world after the ice, sacred mountains may have held special meaning because height itself had become symbolic. Height is safety from flood. Closeness to sky. Distance from the moving sea. A place where a survivor's boat might rest in myth. A place where a people might believe the gods chose to preserve life. Again, this is interpretation, not proof. But it helps us understand why so many ancient stories imagine survival on mountains, hills, highlands, and raised places. The low world changes. The high place remains. And from the high place, people look back. They see water where land once was. Forest where open plain once stretched. New rivers cutting new shapes. Animals missing from the old stories. Children growing up in a world their ancestors would have found strange. So they tell stories. They tell of a colder age. Of great animals. Of floods. Of crossings. Of warnings. Of ancestors who carried fire. Of gods who remade the world. Some stories are practical. Some sacred. Some are both. A story can teach a child not to build too close to water and also teach them that the river has a spirit. A story can preserve the memory of migration and also become a myth of exile and return. A story can remember a vanished animal and also turn it into a creature of dream, power, and the underworld. This is the way human memory works. It does not keep the past frozen. It lets the past live by changing form. Like ice becoming river. Like river becoming sea. Like camp becoming village. Like memory becoming myth. In part 2, we imagined coastlines drowning, rivers swelling, animals shifting, and people standing on the threshold of a new age. In part 3, we see what they do with that threshold. They build. But they do not only build houses. They build meaning. They build explanations for loss. They build rituals to hold gratitude and fear. They build memory into places, names, objects, and eventually, in some parts of the world, into marks on clay, carvings on stone, and stories fixed in writing. The first civilizations that later rose in river valleys did not appear immediately after the Ice Age, and they did not appear everywhere at once. They came much later, through long processes of agriculture, settlement, population growth, exchange, invention, hierarchy, and belief. But the post-Ice Age world helped prepare the ground. Literally and symbolically. Rivers became central. Floodplains became fertile and dangerous. Seasons had to be understood. Storage became essential. Cooperation became more complex. Memory became power. A person who knew when the river rose mattered. A person who remembered old floods mattered. A person who counted grain mattered. A person who told the sacred story mattered. A person who could say, our ancestors survived because they listened, mattered. This is the soft bridge between prehistory and history. Before writing, memory lived in bodies and voices. After writing, some memory could live in marks. But the desire was older than writing. The desire to preserve. To carry forward. To say, this happened, and because it happened, we are who we are. Imagine clay tablets drying in the sun thousands of years after the first changes began. The world is no longer the Ice Age world. There are fields now. Canals. Walls. Temples. boats carrying grain. People with titles. People with duties. People watching rivers and recording what they bring. The tablet is small, pressed with signs. Perhaps it records grain. Perhaps a transaction. Perhaps an offering. Perhaps part of a story. But behind the act is something deeply ancient. The fear of forgetting. And the hope that memory can survive the fragile body. When later Mesopotamian scribes wrote flood stories, they were not writing sleep mysteries for us. They were writing within their own sacred and cultural worlds. Their stories carried meanings about gods, kingship, human limits, divine judgment, survival, and the relationship between human beings and the powers above them. We should honor that. But we can also feel why water held such power in their imagination. In a river civilization, water is life. Too little, and the fields fail. Too much, and the boundaries vanish. Water is never only background. It is destiny moving through the land. Perhaps this is why flood stories endure. They speak to the deep human knowledge that the world we depend on is also the world we cannot fully control. After the Ice Age, that knowledge may have become stronger. The earth itself had shown movement. Ice withdrew. Seas rose. Animals vanished. Land bridges disappeared. New worlds opened. Old worlds sank. And human beings did what they have always done after change. They remembered. They adapted. They made tools. They made shelters. They made paths. They made ceremonies. They made stories. They made beginnings. There is a quiet beauty in this. The end of the Ice Age could be told only as loss, and there was loss. Immense loss. Vanished animals. Drowned lands. Broken routes. Ancient camps now under sea. Human worlds that will never be fully recovered. But it was also the beginning of new abundance. Forests filled with life. Rivers rich with fish. Coasts filled with shellfish and birds. Wild grains waving under warmer skies. Stable places where people could gather, return, and eventually build. The post-Ice Age world was not simply easier. It was more complex. More layered. More capable of holding the beginnings of the human future we recognize. And perhaps that is the answer to the central question. What really happened after the Ice Age? The climate warmed. The glaciers retreated. The seas rose. Land changed. Animals disappeared or moved. Human communities adapted in many different ways. Those are the established outlines. But inside those outlines was a deeper transformation. People entered a world where memory became more important than ever. A world where the old maps could no longer be trusted completely. A world where survival depended not only on following animals, but on reading rivers, coasts, forests, seasons, and the signs of change. A world where staying became possible in new ways. A world where storing, gathering, planting, building, remembering, and explaining would slowly become central to human life. And eventually, in certain places, from that changed relationship with land and time, early civilizations would rise. Not suddenly. Not inevitably. But slowly. Like dawn spreading over a valley after a long cold night. Picture the first new world after the ice in the calm light of evening. A settlement rests above a river. Not grand. Not yet ancient. Just a cluster of shelters, smoke rising, children near the fire, tools placed carefully at the doorway, baskets of seeds protected from damp, a few dogs sleeping close to warmth. Beyond the settlement, the river moves through reeds. Farther away, a forest grows where open cold land once stretched. Farther still, unseen beneath a quiet sea, old camps and paths may sleep underwater. Above it all, the stars return. The same stars that shone over the glaciers. The same stars that watched mammoths cross the plains. The same stars that reflected in meltwater, then rivers, then seas. The people below them are changed, but not separate from those who came before. They carry them in their tools, in their routes, in their fears, in their stories, in the way they watch water, in the way they hold fire, in the way they teach children that the world was once different. This is the great continuity beneath the great change. The Ice Age ended. But humanity did not begin again from nothing. It began again from memory. Every new settlement carried traces of older movement. Every new ritual carried older awe. Every new myth carried older fear and wonder. Every future city, however distant, would rise on a foundation of countless forgotten choices made by people adapting to a changing Earth. Perhaps this is why the end of the Ice Age still feels mysterious. Because it is not only a story about glaciers. It is a story about the moment the human world became unstable, and then more creative. The moment people saw that the Earth could change, and learned to change with it. The moment loss and possibility stood together in the same landscape. The moment the old frozen world began to fade, and the first shapes of our world appeared. And now, as the night grows quiet, we can leave the story there. With a river moving under stars. With the last cold memory of ice far to the north. With a small settlement keeping fire above the dark water. With children sleeping beside the warmth, while elders look toward the horizon and remember animals the young will never see. The world after the Ice Age was not simply warmer. It was stranger. Softer in some places. Harder in others. Filled with new rivers, new forests, new shores, new fears, new abundance, and new ways of being human. Perhaps it was not the beginning of humanity. Humanity was already ancient. But perhaps it was the beginning of the human world we still live in. A world built after change. A world shaped by memory. A world where every river, every coast, every settlement, and every story still carries the quiet question left behind by the melting ice. What do we preserve when the world we knew is gone?